Welcome to Watercolor and Wonder. I'm going to share with you 7 things that I wish I had wondered about before I began watercolor painting. I've stumbled upon these along the way or just learned here and there by accident, often by trial and error. And so I'm going to share them with you today, including my absolute #1 tip on how to become a better watercolor painter at the end of this video. So be sure to stick around for that. Also, like and subscribe if you find this helpful for your painting. That's why I'm here. I want to make watercolor painting better for you, more enjoyable, that you can make things beautiful and just marvel and wonder at the world that we live in. So let's jump right in. #1, the thing I wish I had known is that when you order watercolor paints, you're gathering your supplies, they might come in a tube like this, and yet you see people using a palette like this. What's going on here? You take the paint from the tube, you want to squeeze it into an empty palette well and let it dry. And the reason we do that is that if you paint directly from this, like if you took this tube and you squeeze it out and paint, you're going to fly through watercolor paint and use so much more than you need to or want to. And this stuff isn't cheap. This is a bonus thing. If you're gonna splurge anywhere, splurge on some paint. If you start with better paint, you will start with better results. You can skimp on paper and brushes and palette and everything else. Get yourself good paint. And I'm gonna put links to the things that I use in the show description today. And this is even if you're giving it to your kids. I give my kids good paint because they're going to like it and like what they do better if they have better quality stuff. So that's a little aside. #2, I did not know how to use a water brush, which has become my favorite tool for watercolor painting. I had not even heard of such a thing before I began. And so the way this works, you unscrew it, you fill this section with water, you screw it back together. You now no longer need a cup of water for your painting. This is it. I have this little trick. I put an old but clean sock on this wrist, my non-dominant hand, and when I need to change colors, I just wipe the brush on here. Here's the key though, how to use this, which does take some practice. This works like an eyedropper or a baster, and so you squeeze it gently here in the middle, and you'll see water will begin to come out on my finger. And so you just do that on your paint that you've let dry in your palette now. You squeeze it there, and then you come over here to this section and you keep squeezing it very gently, and you'll see it begin to make a little puddle of paint. Now, here's the key. I'm still squeezing very gently right now. I'm gonna scrape the brush on the edge of my little tray, and then I'm gonna lift it in the air away from my paint and water, and then let go. What happens is, if you have your brush down here in the beautiful paint that you're mixing up, and then you let go, it's like an eyedropper. It's going to suck all your paint up into the brush, which does 2 things that you don't want. 1, it pollutes all your water with that color, and 2, it takes away all the paint you just worked hard to mix up. So if you want to keep your paint on the palette ready to use, just when you're done squeezing, make sure your brush is in the air. Simple as that. It just takes some practice, but you can totally get the hang of it. It's so helpful. All right, #3, I almost every single time sketch out what I'm going to paint before I paint it. I don't just paint directly onto a white page most of the time. So I have an example of that here. So I've sketched out some flowers, and I haven't even finished the sketch yet because this side still has my real general shapes of where things are gonna go, and I've come back and I filled in some of the details. So sketch your shapes out for what you want to paint. And the wonderful thing about watercolor is when you're done, you can just erase all the pencil marks. It pulls right up with just a regular eraser. So that is a super helpful thing that I do now. #4, tape your paper down. If you're painting something especially if you're covering the whole paper with water, tape it down so you don't get these hills and valleys and your paper gets wavy and your water and your paint start pooling up on you, and it just can ruin the paper. This is also good If you are working in a shared space, especially with children around, when you are done, you can take this and safely put it away somewhere to bring it back out when you're ready to paint again. Speaking of, number five, be patient. This is the hardest one. This is the most painful lesson I've learned. Let your watercolor dry, especially if you're anxious to erase all those pencil marks and you want to see the finished painting that you've worked so hard on. If you try to erase slightly damp watercolor paper, your eraser will rip your paper up. And I learned that the hard way. So I ruined a lovely painting or two that way. Just wait, just let it dry completely. And that goes for not just the erasing part, but if you wanted to add a second layer of a different color or a darker shade or a shadow or whatever the detail is you want to put on top. If you don't want it to blend or rip or pool, give the watercolor time to dry. So give yourself that time. Number 6, it is also okay to not finish the painting when you sit down. Maybe this doesn't apply to all of you, but man, there was something in my mind that when I began, I felt like when I sat down to paint, that was it. The painting must be completed by the time I stand up. And so I would get really upset if something interrupted me or if I couldn't find the time, and so days just kept going by and I couldn't find the time to get back to it because I thought I needed this large chunk of time to paint. You can paint in increments, and I have one here to show you as well. It's not taped down because I'm not going to paint the whole thing, but I've just sketched it and I've begun painting a little bit of it as I had time. And then that's fine. I can just walk away and come back to it later because I don't have to finish a painting every time I sit down to paint. Hopefully that gives you some freedom as well. Okay, number 7, this is the most important thing I can tell you, and I'm telling this to myself as well because it was a lesson that I had to learn. If you want to be a better watercolor painter, you have to paint. Doesn't that sound, I know it sounds silly. I'm not trying to trick you with a big letdown for number 7. It's true. Like I had all these aspirations to be a painter, and yet I just wouldn't paint. And I realized one day that if I really wanted to do this, if I wanted to see progress in my work, because when you begin something, turns out you may not be great at it from the beginning. That was the case for me. I'm going to show you a picture of a butterfly that I painted. It was one of my first attempts at watercolor. I hope you find it extremely encouraging because it's very sad. And then a butterfly I painted about, I think it was about a year later. Side by side, same butterfly, same artist, same materials. The only difference is I just put in the time. I just did it. And so that is what you're going to see dramatic improvements if you just give yourself the chance. So practice, especially if you want to get good at a certain thing. You want to paint flowers, paint a lot of flowers. If you want to get good at painting trees, paint a lot of trees. Like whatever it is for you that makes you excited and that you wish, like, oh, I would love to make that. It would look so beautiful. Keep doing it. Give yourself a challenge, a set number. Like, I'm going to paint 10 of these this month. I'm going to paint 20 of these this week. However much time you have available to you, go and paint, and you will see improvement.